This program is made possible through the financial support of viewers like you. To find out more about how you can partner with the MAD Broadcasting Network, please visit our website at www.madbroadcastingnetwork.com.
نجوم لاحت في العليا لتناجي العزة والسؤدد وبريق يسطع أخاذا ونفوس الناس بها تسعد.
Welcome back to Mad Islam. I am your host, Farah Prudence, and with me today again is Dr. Paula Bodington. She is going to be doing this third part in a series. We're talking about sex grooming gangs, specifically in the UK. In the past two parts, we had a general introduction. We also talked about the techniques that these sex grooming gangs use in order to lure the girls. We talked about the police, what parents are doing to try and combat this, how often it's happening, who the targeted victims are for the most part. Today, we want to talk about something. We're going to talk about several things. But one of the questions that people usually ask is, why do these girls keep going back? Dr. Paula, thank you so much for being with us again today. Could you give us an answer to that question?
Okay, yes. So there are different answers in different kinds of cases. So sometimes the girls are going back because of direct threats that the abusers have made. So for instance, it's very, very common that they would threaten the girl that if they don't come back or they don't answer their texts or come immediately and meet them, they will do something like they will harm their younger brothers and sisters, they'll come and rape their mother, they'll set fire to the house, they'll kill one of their pets, or they might, tell somebody what they've done and they'll be in trouble. So sometimes one of the things that happens is that the girls are exploited or dragged into committing some kind of criminal activity. So they might be afraid that if they don't come back, they're going to get reported to the police and end up in prison themselves. And of course, you have to remember as well how young the girls are. So it's really easy to believe those threats. There was Telford, which is a small town in the Midlands, kind of between Birmingham and Wales. There's been a lot of spotlight on Telford because it's come to light there are hundreds and hundreds of cases in this quite small town. And some of the girls there said that they were threatened that their houses would be burnt down. And it's not surprising that they believed them because there was a girl who'd been abused and the house was burnt down and she died in a fire. So I think her mother died as well. But yeah, so having seen that the houses have been set on fire, then that's why they would believe there were direct threats. And actually it's And so often when the girls are going back, they're doing it to protect their families. That's one of the reasons why I personally find it just so shocking that these girls have been so often vilified or accused of being child prostitutes. When to go back to these abusers, they're being really brave. They're going back to be raped because they don't want their mother to be raped. So
it's heartbreaking. I don't understand how anybody can look at this and blame the girls under any circumstance. We often see, unfortunately, in society where, she's dressing and asking for it, or she's behaving like a slut, I guess is the word. And so she's asking for it. She deserves what she's getting. And that's just simply not true. It could be it's the furthest thing away from the truth. Yes. Let me ask you this, and this is not in our plan for today. The term child prostitute. So say the police arrest a child prostitute. Is that child 13, 14 years old? Is she taken to jail? Does she actually have criminal charges against her in the UK?
No. Because I mean, previously, what would more likely to have been happened is that they would just think it was consensual. But now that has changed. So there is a long variety of different offences that somebody can be charged with. I think in America, in most states, you have a notion of statutory rape. Is that correct?
Yes.
Well,
yes.
We don't use that terminology, but there are varying offences of sexual activity with a child, and there are differences between the exact offence and the sorts of sentence you might get, depending on if the child is under 16. 16 is the age of consent, and under 13. So it's more serious if a child is under 13. And so someone got a long list of various offences that you might be charged with. So yeah. So that a child couldn't be charged with being a child prostitute.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah,
That's a great thing. What usually happens when this child is arrested, or when they're, if they bust a ring, for example, are they taken to social services? Are they taken to the hospital? What are the first things that happen, or is it different on a case-by-case basis?
I think it's probably different on a case-by-case basis. So often they would be taken along. They often have special centres where if someone has been there's been a sexual crime, they're taken along to a sort of a rape suite. It depends on the area as to whether they're available. So then the people there would be trained in how to deal with victims of sexual crimes, because you have to collect forensic evidence,
right,
in order to get the case to stick. But then that people will be trained to try to deal as sensitively as possible with
to handle that.
Yeah.
So what are the effects on the family? Obviously, we're going to delve into the effects on the actual victims and the girls, or the girls and the boys, of course. But what are the effects, say, on the parents?
Okay, yeah, they're pretty terrible. So actually, in terms, you asked the question about why the girls keep going back. So there are other things I could say about that. So should I talk about that first, or the effects on the parents?
Yes, let's do that.
Yeah. So sometimes they're going back because of direct threats. Sometimes they're going back because of what you might broadly term a kind of brainwashing, because it's been normalised, or because they're suffering from what's known as trauma bonding. So trauma bonding.
Hold on. Let's redo that. I think Robin would like it if we redid that. Okay, hold on. Okay. So try that again. Here we go. Okay. So we covered, or you covered the direct threats. I'm going to burn your house. I'm going to rape your mom. I'm going to rape your siblings. I'm going to kill them. All of that in order to get the girls to keep coming back.
Yes.
So what are other ways that they use in order to make sure that their victims stay victims?
Okay. Well, in many cases, the girls are suffering from what's known as trauma bonding, which is often more commonly known as Stockholm Syndrome. Have you heard of Stockholm Syndrome?
I have heard of Stockholm Syndrome. I think it's why America keeps considering voting for the Clintons.
Yeah.
I think that's Stockholm Syndrome. Sorry, go ahead. So trauma bonding is what it's actually called. Okay.
Yeah, so it's where a victim comes to identify with her or his abuser. So imagine you've been kidnapped by somebody. The brain goes into survival mode.
Right.
So you do whatever is going to mean that you've got the biggest chance of actually surviving what's going on. Just it's like a kind of, you can understand it as a sort of physiological response.
Right.
And the way in which it's induced is that you will be very cruel to somebody or treat them really badly, interspersed with small bits of kindness. And then you will try as hard as you can to get those other little tiny bits of kindness, and you will end up identifying with the victims. Sorry.
With the perpetrators.
And identifying with the perpetrators. So you will, for example, end up feeling sorry for them, or end up believing they really love you. So any small sign of affection will be taken as a sign of love. So that somebody might be incredibly cruel to you, or sort of say, oh, pimp a girl out. So she's having an absolutely terrible time. A small, tiny girl being forced to have sex over and over with all these horrible, ghastly men. And then he will say, oh, but I bought you a necklace, or give her a cuddle. And that will be a situation that can incite trauma bonding, so that you have a really a close connection with them. Because
how do they know this? How do they know how to do this? Is there like a pervert manual or guide? How do they know? Do they?
Yeah. That's a good question. I kind of think there might be a kind of pervert manual or a guide. I mean, because I think they must be swapping techniques with themselves. Or I also kind of think that there are some people who are a bit sociopathic, who instinctively know how to manipulate people. You know the sort of person I mean?
Yes. It's my dad would be one. My biological father is one of those. Just instinctively knows how to manipulate people. It's just the degree to which that is to show kindness to somebody that you're.
Yes.
Just yes. You're damning them is what you're doing.
Yes.
Not a better word for it. That's
yes. And and all part and parcel of all these kinds of techniques of bonding the the victim to the abusers is that you make their world so small that their world is just focused on these abusers. So a very, very common thing is that they'll give a girl a mobile phone. So that's one of the other signs, but she's suddenly got money or jewelry or an expensive mobile phone. You know, if you've got or even if you've got an average income, you wouldn't expect a girl to suddenly have a £250 mobile phone.
Right.
And then they will often bombard the girl all day long with texts. So she'll be answering the texts just constantly. What are you doing? I want FaceTime with you. Talk to me. It's constant interaction. So her world just becomes focused on that person. So
Right.
it's kind of like a virus taking over the whole of your brain. That's not a very scientific way of explaining it, but that's how kind of I understand it. So meanwhile, they'll tend to cut her off from her other friends who aren't involved, move to a different group of friends who are involved, maybe some slightly older girls. One of the things that often happens is that the older girls, once they get beyond, say mid-teens, they sometimes switch to being recruiters. So they'll end up recruiting younger girls. So you will sometimes see, for example, that a small minority of the perpetrators in court are actually female. Now, it depends on the different case, but sometimes they will have been recruited. They might be, sometimes those women have been drug addicts or prostitutes who are getting their drugs from the gangs and have just been recruited into enabling the abuse as well.
Right.
But it's so the trauma bonding and the connection is just taking it over the whole world of a child. So very often when you say, well, how do they manage to get there? Why don't the parents shut them in their houses and stop them going? So one of the things that happens is that police have given parents different advice depending on what part of the country and what the police are. Some police have said to the parents, you are not allowed to keep your daughter under lock and key.
Excuse me?
Yeah, they have said you can't do that. You can't actually lock her in. But in any case, there have been cases where the parents have just locked the house, locked the windows, locked the doors, and the girl's been so desperate to get out, they've broken out of the bathroom window, come down the drain pipes, just undone locks because they're desperate to get out because of the. So that, you know, for example, I can remember a case where a girl had a child, had a baby, and then threatening to harm her baby. And if somebody was threatening to harm your baby, you'd probably shinny down a drain pipe as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, probably would. That's so they had her baby. That's we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that probably on our next episode. Mm-hmm. So the girls keep going back, direct threats, trauma bonding. Is there anything else that leads them to go back?
Well, I just think it's, in some cases, it's sort of like normalized. It's just like, this is what life is like. It just becomes normalized. Again, because you have to remember the age of the girls. There's been a recent case in Bristol where there were groups of Somali men abusing girls. And it's been reported, I've heard this reported before as well, but the Somali men were just saying, remember how young the girls are. They're just saying, oh, it's part of our culture. In our culture, everybody has sex with their boyfriend's friends. It's normalized. So I suppose you could think of it as a kind of brainwashing. This is everybody's doing this. Yeah, so that's one of the things that goes on. And of course, in other cases, the girls are going back because they've become addicted to drugs.
Right, of course. The drugs, we talked about that as a luring technique. Okay, so the effects on the victims are probably too many to count. But the parents are victims of this as well. The siblings are victims of this. Yes. So let's start with them. What are the effects on the parents? Are they just the I have failed to protect my daughter feeling, or are there more effects than that?
There's more effects than that. There's more effects than that because it's not like your daughter's just stuffed her school exams or she's got a boyfriend from the wrong side of the tracks. It's a lot worse. It's a lot worse than that. The parents are absolutely devastated, and the ones who are just. So the kinds of effects on the parents, there's a big problem if once the parents are outnumbered by the children, or say you've got two children at home and your daughter's gone missing. Now, if there's two parents, then one of the parents can go out looking while the other one stays at home and looks after children. You might even be in a two-parent family, but one of them's at work. There's a terrible strain between, do you prioritize the siblings who are still at home? Do you prioritize the one who's gone missing? How do you protect the younger siblings from knowing what's going on?
Right.
There's some terrible strains on a marriage because you might be, a relationship would have to be rock solid not to have cracks or strains in it with something like this happening. There's lack of sleep. You're staying up, worrying where your daughter is. The anxiety must be crippling. So parents suffer from completely understandable mental health problems. Doesn't mean to say they've got anything, wrong with them. It would be completely normal to suffer from anxiety and from depression. And the sleep deprivation in itself causes depression. And there was a study carried out last year by a research group at the University of Worcestershire, which looked at the health impacts on parents, because charities working with parents noticed that over and over and over again, the parents are suffering from terrible physical health impacts. So often you'll find the parents have had heart attacks, they've had, real deleterious impacts on their physical health as well as their mental and psychological health. And another impact that parents have often missed a huge amount of work because they're going out looking for their daughters, or they've got meetings with social workers, meetings with the school, meetings to do with a trial. Some employers are very understanding, but other employers not so understanding. So, for example, it depends on what kind of situation you're in, but parents have lost loads and loads of money. They might have lost work, they might have lost jobs. So a lot of people now, I don't know if you have the same thing in the States, but there are lots of people who have got basically a terrible jobs with or calling employment contracts, where you might have a 0 hours contract, so that if you miss work, that's it, you don't get the money. And it's all very well to say, well, if you value your daughter, you do without the money, but you've got to
live.
You've got to live. You've got other children. You've got to pay the mortgage. You've got to pay the rent. So huge, huge, huge impacts on the parents and on the extended family. There may well be people, understandable. You might be trying to blame each other. Even if you start off with a good relationship, it would be really difficult to be able to cope with the strain.
Absolutely. What about the siblings? Like you said, how do you can't shelter the siblings forever from what's going on with their sister or even their brother at some point. What effects does that have on them? Have there been any studies or any kind of comments or notes made on that?
Yes. Well, so it's often a really terrible effect on the siblings. So often the parents sometimes the siblings are brought into it as well. So the parents are often really worried about trying to protect the siblings. So they might be, very protective of the siblings. The siblings often find that they end up being neglected by the parents, because with the best will in the world, you can only spread yourself so thin. So the siblings,
right.
You often find that the siblings have their school work suffers, their mental health suffers. They might be bullied or picked on at school because of it. So there are really, really bad effects on the siblings as well. And sometimes parents have found that they have to decide whether or not they're going to concentrate on their siblings and maybe put the daughter who's being abused into care. That might be a better way to try to break up the family. But often that backfires, because once a girl is in care, then sometimes the abusers have even easier access to them. But the whole family can be affected. So one of the things which can affect the whole family is the threats and the intimidation. So very often you'll find that if there's any sort of threat that the girl might try to escape from the abusers, or the abusers will do things like they'll drive slowly up and down the street so that you know that they're there, or they'll come to the house so to make sure we know where you live. It's that kind of really threatening element that you might have, that they're going to come back and they're going to harangue you. People are often really worried when it goes to court, if people are going to find out that I'm giving evidence for a case involving a relative, that are people going to find out, am I going to be harassed and intimidated? And I think I mentioned before threats of arson attacks on the house. So
the arson attacks, can we delve into that, please?
Yes.
Wait, are they just saying, I'm going to burn your house down?
Yes.
And why is that believable? I mean, if somebody tells me I'm going to burn your house down, I'm like, okay, you could try. Well, it's not something that I take seriously.
Yeah, it's believable because it's happened. So for example, there have been lots of cases in Telford, which is a medium-sized town in the Midlands, where there were threats of arson, and the girls believed it because there had been an arson attack on a house, and the girl involved and her mother I think it's her mother, were both killed in the arson attack.
Well, when somebody says an arson attack here, I imagine people breaking into the house, throwing gasoline or some kind of fuel all over and lighting it up.
Yeah.
Is that basically what happens?
Yes. So what basically happens, so just to explain to like American viewers, because population density is much greater here in general. We have houses where we have letterboxes in the front door. So we don't have letterboxes, which means the front doors have all got a hole in them.
Okay.
So what would typically happen in an arson attack or a threat of an arson attack, that you would put gasoline or what we call petrol, some inflammatory thing on a rag, or just tip it, pour it through the letterbox and set fire to it. So the fire starts inside the house. So actually that's quite easy to do. So you can actually buy, you can check it out on Amazon, you can buy them on Amazon, you can buy arson-proof letterboxes so that you can put them behind your front door to try to minimize the impact, the possibility of arson. And I found this out from reading a report about the health impacts on parents, descriptions of parents about how they go to bed at night with buckets of water behind their front door in case there's an arson attack. So you remember, at night, you might be used to the idea of you lock the door, you put the cat out, you make certain you've turned off the TV, and then you put some buckets of water behind the front door in case there's an arson attack. Can you imagine? Can you imagine?
Honestly, here's my... I can, to respond as honestly as I possibly can. Here's our... part of our nighttime ritual. We make sure that the gates are closed outside because we live in what is dubbed the fortress by our friends and family. And we make sure all the doors are locked. We make sure our guns are out from the safe so we are able to reach them if we need to. But I don't ever think that maybe somebody's going to burn my house down. We make sure the dogs are out, the cat is out, and everything's taken care of. But do I ever put buckets of water out or think maybe I need 10 fire extinguishers around in case somebody tries to burn down my house? No, that doesn't happen. And it's so sad that's that's needed. I mean, the fact that there's an actual product means that there's a market, which means that there's demand, which means that it happens. Often enough that somebody's trying to make a profit off of it, which I don't think it's trying to make a profit, but it's that's pretty scary.
Just to give you an example of some of the other things that parents are doing, and again, this came from the same report of a mother talking about how both her daughters were so frightened of what the perpetrators might do, but to defend themselves, they would steal sharp knives from the kitchen and sleep at night with a sharp knife under their pillow. And so she had to go around the beds at night time doing what she called a knife sweep to get the knives back. And then she was thinking to herself, well, my daughters feel safer if they have a sharp knife under their pillow, so maybe I should let them sleep with a sharp knife under their pillow because they feel safer. Imagine as a mother having that dilemma. Imagine it. It's inconceivable. No wonder the parents have such terrible health impacts on the whole family. It's unbelievable.
That breaks the soul. Like, that's not, I went through a car accident. I feel broken. That is breaking their essence, their very being as a mother, as a father. That is breaking them down. But in closing, I want to ask you a question, and you may not know the legal answers to it. These girls were sleeping with knives under their pillow. From what I've heard here, I'm not very familiar with English law, is what can you do for self-defense? From what I heard here, if there was a gentleman who shot an intruder and he's the one who's in jail, not the intruder, the guy who tried to defend his home. In terms of me, I'm very big on our Second Amendment and our gun rights. But what can you do in the UK to defend yourself that's not going to land you in prison?
Oh, right. Actually, so I'm not an expert on this, actually, but that is a good question because you're quite right. So I might be wrong about this, but I seem to remember that, say in the UK, if you sleep with a baseball bat under your bed to bash a burglar with, then you can be in trouble for doing that because it's like having a weapon prepared. So for example, you mentioned that you keep your guns out. So in the UK, so I do know people who have guns because I know people who do shooting, but I mean they would do shooting game and so on. they would have to keep their guns locked up at all times. You wouldn't be allowed to have them out. I believe so. We have much stricter laws. So, but I think that's a really good question. I don't. I mean, and of course, if the girls are doing it and they're under the age of 16, it might be different as well, because they'd be. I actually don't know the answer to that question, but it's a really good question.
I think that really tears down the basic instinct of being able to protect your children while they're at home. This is one of the things that I really value, is being able to protect my child. And God forbid somebody would try to take away a tool that I have to be able to protect my family, because these sex grooming gangs or any perpetrators are really vicious. And like you said, they're kind of like psychopaths, and they really don't care who they take down in the process of trying to please themselves or gain a profit or do whatever it takes. Well, we've got so much to do, so much to talk about, and so much to do as a society in order to protect our children, in order to make sure that this does not continue to happen. And this is why we're going to have part 3.
Okay.
To
part 4.
Part 4. Part 4, you're right. We're going to have part 4 and really talk about these things. And we're what we're going to try and do is get some of these victims, because a lot of them are speaking out, you had said, and trying to educate people about what's going on. And we'd love to hear from them personally. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Boddington. You are a wealth of knowledge, and I appreciate you talking about this, even though it's got to be really hard. It's got to be really hard to read about this, especially as a mother and an educator. How do you deal with it?
Well, I have to just deal with it with my kind of like intellectual head, because if you think about it too much, you just start crying. So if I come across as being cold, it's because you have to, otherwise you just start crying, really.
Right. No, I understand that completely. I talk about my life story, and people ask me, they're like, oh, how can you just say it like a story? Because I don't think about it. I don't feel it. I separate myself from it. And I have to do that every day with the work that I do, talking about the different crimes that are coming up, because if I start to feel it, then I'm going to break down myself. I just have to report on it and just kind of put a barrier, not to be cold, but to protect our hearts. And that's what it is. And try to really look at the good. Well, I love you being with us. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you to our audience, our viewers. Please leave your comments, questions, share this video. It is so important that we talk about this. I know it's heartbreaking. I know it's hard, but if we don't talk about it, we can't stop it. If you do love our shows, make sure that you make a donation to the MAD Broadcasting Network. It is a fabulous network with a fearless leader trying to bring you the truth and report on things that mainstream media just doesn't want to touch. This is Farah Prudence, and this has been another episode of Mad Islam. Have a good night.
نجوم لاحت في العليا لتناجي العزة والسؤدد، وبريق يسطع أخاذا ونفوس الناس بها تسعد.